And welcome to a very, very special edition of Rosen Sports Monday. Thrilled to have my guest today, Mitch Albom. And you know the name. If you've watched and read and heard about Tuesdays with Morrie, you understand how big a factor this man has been in the literary world and been a friend of mine. I've got to know him years ago. And just to kind of give you a little background, Mitch is the author of numerous books, fiction, nonfiction. They have collectively sold more than 42 million copies in 48 languages worldwide. He has written 8 #1 New York Times bestsellers, including Tuesdays with Morrie, as I mentioned, the best-selling memoir of all time. Award-winning television films, stage plays, screenplays, a nationally syndicated newspaper column, and a musical. And through his work at the Detroit Free Press, he was inducted in both the National Sports Media Association and Michigan Sports Hall of Fame and is the recipient of the 2010 Red Smith Award for Lifetime Achievement. Albom also founded and oversees Say Detroit, a consortium of 9 different charitable operations in his hometown of Detroit, along with a nonprofit dessert shop and food product line to serve and fund programs for Detroit's most underserved citizens. And since 2010, he has operated the Have Faith Haiti Orphanage in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, which was struck by a devastating earthquake years ago. And he visits Haiti monthly. He lives with his wife, Janine, in Michigan. So without further ado, and we first of all thank our sponsors, Lexus of Wayzata and Lexus of Maplewood, and Stretch Labs throughout the Twin Cities. Here's my conversation with Mitch Albom. Well, Mitch Albom, I can't tell you how much I appreciate spending some time with us today on my little podcast, Rosen Sports Monday. It was great running into you at the Central Library in downtown Minneapolis, much to my surprise that you were coming in town to promote your new novel twice, which I've read twice already, but it's had a big impact on my life. But it was great because we go back a ways. The first time I think we connected, this is to show you how fate works, and you know this better than anyone. You were obviously working in Detroit for the Detroit Free Press. In 1987, the Twins were about to play the Detroit Tigers in the ALCS, and my management, your boss, whomever, got a hold of you and said, we're going to have this little exchange on television. Mitch is obviously going to take the side of the Tigers. We're going to exchange some interesting barbs and have some fun. And we did. We had a lot of fun. And I had never met you before, obviously. And the Twins shocked the Tigers, went on to win their first World Series. So thank you for that. But you remember going through all that nonsense at that time?
I remember all of it. Yeah, I do. And you were very gracious, as all Minnesotans are. Even when you were tussling with me, you still had respect and manners, and I always appreciated that. And I've always admired the work that you've done. And you and I are a little parallel. You know, we've stayed in our cities for a long time.
Yeah.
We didn't jump around to a bunch of other places trying to climb the ladder. We were happy in our Midwestern cities, and it's one of the things I've always admired about you, Mark, and I'm very, very happy to do your program.
Well, I appreciate it so much. And I just want to start with the conversation about where you decided to make your appearance at the Central Library in downtown Minneapolis. And I think you said something that night about the importance of libraries in your life and how people should approach them, because to a great extent, the way we use our devices and find out our information. And I hope that libraries are still as vital as ever, but you never know. And it was important to you to be there, and it certainly had an impact on a lot of folks for what you had to say about libraries.
Yeah, I mean, libraries aren't what they used to be, unfortunately, in people's lives, as well as just in the presence along the the landscape. There are so many fewer of them, and but there are a number that still thrive, and I think more than ever, they are the way that people without a lot of means are able to read. Back when we were growing up, it was the way that everybody read. It wasn't the place where poor people went to read books. It was a place where everybody went. Now people who have the means can just sit at home and order a book off of Amazon and everything's fine. It just comes to the house, or they can read it on their Kindle, or they can read it on their phone. But not everybody is able to just buy every book that they want to read or download every book. And I think the library becomes that much more important to people who don't have those means to do it. And so I really try to support them in any city that I go to, and that was a beautiful one there.
It certainly was. Maybe the same in some respects, and you've been in the newspaper business for a long, long time, can be said about newspapers. I was just reading here locally that the Minneapolis Star-Tribune isn't sending reporters to cover like the Timberwolves right now out of town, budget constraints, and that's. What's your viewpoint on the daily newspaper? Because I'm old school. I still like to pick up have it the ink on my fingertips, et cetera, et cetera. But it does seem to be an issue beyond, obviously everything is being read online, but can they survive? Can the modern day newspaper in print survive the next 10 years?
I don't think so in the long term, Mark. I just, the economics of it, it's not so much even the printing of it. It's not so much even that you no longer with the deadlines that you need to have, like the Detroit Free Press where I work always had early deadlines. But now, because they've consolidated their printing presses to try to save money and they print the paper very, very far away from Detroit, we literally have to have stories in for the next day by 4:00. Well, how are you going to cover a night game of any kind, or even a baseball game that goes extra innings if it's a day game, or even a football game with a 4:00 deadline? And so consequently, the paper that people pick up the next morning doesn't even have a game story in it, much less a column. And meanwhile, they can go online 5 minutes after the game is over and read a full account, and then they can see the videos, and then they can see the locker room, and then they can see the posts from the individual players who put them up on their own sites. So by the time the next morning comes around, what's even left to say? Let alone the fact that whatever you're reading had to be written, 20 hours earlier. So I just don't see the long range way that economically it survives, because in addition to printing it and all that, you still have to deliver it. Yeah. And the further out newspapers get from the actual place where they're printed, the more expensive it becomes to deliver it. Here in Detroit, for many years, they don't have home delivery of the Free Press on 4 days a week. You can only get it home delivered 3 days a week. And if you want it 7 days a week, you have to pay an extra price just to have someone, and it's an outside service, just to have them bring it to the house. So it's very discouraging and depressing for people like you and me who loved the value of a print newspaper, who relished the whole experience of sitting in a chair, with a cup of coffee and just perusing the news and reading it instead of having your eyes burning from being on a screen for umpteen hours. But I fear that within time, and I don't know what that time is, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, but I think within time, everything will go the digital route.
Yeah, we're seemingly on that route right now. Well, you had written a number of sports books, kind of Detroit, Michigan, intrusive, with Bo Schembechler, the Fab Five. And I remember you called, I think, or got a hold of me somehow. It wasn't through, we didn't have texting or emails back then, but I think I was doing my radio show. You were telling me about this new book that was not a sports book, and could you come out and talk about it? And it was called Tuesdays with Morrie, and you started telling me the background about the sociology professor that taught you at Brandeis, and you mentioned that night at the library you took this class, you were going to drop it because I think 8 people in the class, but he talked you into staying the class, and look what that turned into. I mean, and maybe there's a lesson for all of us not to just diminish, finding those encounters and understanding how fate can lead you to something like it led you to, this wonderment of dealing with this wonderful human being that ended up being the source of one of the best sellers of all time.
Well, it only goes to show you, as you tell that story, that I had to call you to ask if I could get on your show. And that's very typical of what happened with Tuesdays with Morrie. I only wrote Tuesdays with Morrie to pay Morrie's medical bills. I wasn't trying to become a certain kind of author or anything like that. I wrote it to pay Morrie's medical bills. And I thought, they printed 20,000 copies of it, and I thought I'd have them in the trunk of my car for the rest of my life and, be giving them out at Christmas time. Nobody thought it was going to be some kind of bestseller in any way. In fact, nobody even wanted the book when I went around to publishers. I mean, I had to beg a publisher finally to publish it. Everybody said, no, it's boring, it's depressing, you're a sports writer, you can't write it. So it was up against all odds that the book even got published in the first place. And the money that they gave us, I just gave to Morrie to pay off his medical bills. And that was it. And so when it first came out, nobody wanted to interview me because the sports stations, when they heard this was not a book about sports, said, well, forget it. We don't want to talk to him about that. And the places that were non-sports, they all looked at me and said, well, he's a sports writer. What does he know about, meaning of life books and things? So we're not taking him. So I was in no man's land. I had to call people to say, can I come on your show? And you were kind enough to let me come on. And now you look back on it, and Tuesdays with Morrie is the best-selling memoir of all time. And I don't have any idea how that happened, considering how it began.
Well, again, we're talking with Mitch Albom. Let's back up and hit the rewind button a bit, because I think that the story is so important. You told it that night again at the library in 1995, I believe it was. You were watching, Nightline with Ted Koppel, the great show that people were watching a lot, and Morrie was a guest. In fact, you ran the clip that night at the library on the show, speaking about living and dying with ALS, and you felt guilty because you had said, I'm going to stay in touch with you, right, after you left his last class. And then it took, 16 years before you finally then
16 years. And just to fully admonish myself, because I deserve it, Morrie wasn't just a professor that I had who I took a couple classes with. I took every class that Morrie offered. I majored in sociology because of him. I wrote my honors thesis with him. I went to his house and ate meals with him. We walked around campus together. So when we departed, it was more like an uncle and nephew kind of thing, not just another student and professor. And I promised I would stay in touch. And then first I was in the music business for a while and living in New York and overseas. And then I got wrapped up in the sports writing business and sports broadcasting and ESPN. And I really became so self-centered and so self-ambitious. I never really thought about getting back in touch with him. In my mind, it was like, I should call him. It's been a while. I should call him. I should write him. I should call him. And then all of a sudden, 16 years later, I flipped through the remote control, and there he is on Nightline talking to Ted Koppel about what it was like to die. So I get a lot of credit for writing Tuesdays with Morrie, which I appreciate, but I don't think it's as deserved as people sometimes intend, because I try to remind them, if I hadn't been such a self-obsessed jerk for the 16 years, it wouldn't have been so long that I hadn't seen him, and it wouldn't have been that big a deal to be reunited with him. And I should have been a better friend and student to him for those 16 years, and not just for the 6 months or so that we visited every Tuesday.
But all of us could beat ourselves up a little bit, or a lot, because we've all, I think, had maybe not a Morrie in our life, but someone like that. And you go, yeah, we'll get back to you. It could be a professor, it could be a good friend, whatever it might be. And then time goes by, we all get busy, we get married with this and that, and the next thing you know, it doesn't happen. When you sat down with him on those Tuesdays, was it that the intent to write the book? Were you taking notes?
Oh, no.
Not at all.
Oh, right? No. No, gosh, no. The first visit was just supposed to be one-time visit. And in fact, I was, you'll appreciate this, when I pulled up to his house, I was in the rent-a-car on the phone, on the rent-a-phone, because back then, 1995, you had to rent the cell phone that came with the car. And I was talking to ESPN about something or another that I can't even remember. And I came down the street, and unbeknownst to me, it was a warm day, and he had asked his nurses to put him out on the curb so he could greet me, right at the curb. And I'm driving down the street, and I'm on the phone, and I see him up ahead, and I realize what's going on, and I hit the brakes. I stopped the car, and of course, what I should have done was take the phone and throw it out the window and run out and give this man a hug. I haven't seen him in 16 years. Instead, what I actually did was continue the conversation with ESPN, but sink down below the dashboard so that he wouldn't see me. And I stayed on the floor of the car, finishing that conversation with ESPN, which I can't even remember what it was about.
Sure.
Because at that point in my life, work came first, and anything else could wait, even a dying old man, which is a terrible thing to admit about yourself. But I know that there are people listening to you who probably would do the same thing if they were in that situation.
Well, why, when it was all said and done, and looking back on it, I always get asked, what's your favorite book? And without hesitation, I've always said Tuesdays with Morrie because it just hit a nerve with me. But why did it resonate with so many people? Because like you said, you get turned down many times. Like, who wants to read this by publishers? I mean, going, this doesn't make a lot of sense. And yet it made all sorts of sense to everybody.
If I had to, I've been asked that a lot over the years, and if I had to come to what I think is the correct answer, it's that everybody who reads Tuesdays with Morrie slots themselves into one of the two positions. Either they have somebody in their life who's kind of their Morrie, and if I had a nickel for every time somebody pulled out their wallet and took out a photo and said, "This is my Morrie," I'd be a rich man. People have that, they're, as you said, their teacher, their professor, the guy next door, the grandparent, someone who kind of mentored them that they've lost and to age or illness, and it reminds them of him. Or they identify with my character, which at the time was kind of, going 100 miles an hour, but without a whole lot of satisfaction. And they come along with that journey. What I found traveling around the world, 30 years since Tuesdays with Morrie's been out now, almost, that this is a universal role. And you can find teachers and wayward students in every culture and in every country. And I think that's it. I don't think it was my writing or my brilliant way of stating anything. I don't think it was any of that. I just think it was the dynamic between, an older person and a younger person.
Interesting man, to say the least. And I felt like I got to know him so well. And then, 10 years later, as it turns out, 2005, you were Ted Koppel's final guest in his farewell broadcast. Is that true?
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
That was the last Nightline show.
Oh,
yeah.
Man.
That was a nice program. He was, Ted is a great guy and very smart and yet also has a tender side. And he really loved Morrie. And for him to make his last show, he could have just done a greatest hits. And look at all the world leaders that I've talked to. Look at all the newsmakers and game changers I've talked to. Here's 30 seconds of me with this one. Here's 30 seconds of me with that one. Instead, he dedicated the whole program to Morrie. And we just talked about Morrie and those shows. And I think that shows you a lot about Ted Koppel.
Yeah, the made-for-TV movie. Jack Lemmon was in it. Hank Azaria played you, right? One of my favorite characters of all time. Yeah. That must have been fun. Yeah. Weird
poor
watching
Hank.
Watching you on the screen. 5 people.
I tease Hank. Yeah. I'm still friends with him, and
lucky.
I say to him, one day, one day, Hank, you're going to be in the actor's old age home, and the guy on the left is going to say, when I was younger, I played Othello. And the guy on the right is say, well, when I was younger, I played Hamlet. And you're going to be able to say, when I was younger, I played Mitch Albom. They're going to all go, who?
Yeah. Oh, they know who. But you also, you're so diversified, Mitch. Again, we're talking about Mitch Albom. You talked about the love of music. You're a songwriter, you're a pianist, lyricist. You've done a lot. So, was that always been a passion growing up in the kind of a family environment, or what's kind of stoked your flame and to get involved in music as much as you did? And thought at one
that was
point,
my first love, Mark.
Yeah,
that was my first love. That's all I really wanted to do. I never trained for anything else. I was a musician through high school and only went to college because I was one of those kids whose parents said, well, that's fine, you can be a musician after you get a college degree.
Sure.
But you're going to college. So I went and I majored in sociology because of Morrie, but I took music lessons and I studied over at the Berklee Conservatory for Jazz. And my whole plan as soon as I got out was, okay, I've done the college thing. Now I'm going into music. And that's what I did. And I lived over in Greece for a while and I played in a nightclub there as a singer and a piano player. And then I should have just stayed there forever because I got my own bungalow on the Aegean Sea and I had a great tan and they paid me in cash, American dollars. And it was an unbelievable job. But, when you're that age, you're so hungry and you're so ambitious. So I had to get back to move into a hovel apartment in Harlem, New York, so I could starve to death trying to be a musician. Because, why stay in a luxurious Greek island when you can starve in New York City? And so I went there, and that was really my first, I stayed with music for several years, but it really wasn't working out for me. And I volunteered for a local newspaper during the day because I worked at night. I played piano bars and with bands and stuff like that. So during the day I had free time, and there was a local newspaper where I lived out in Queens, New York, that I picked up in a supermarket one time, and it said, if you have spare time, we could use help putting out the newspaper, volunteering. And I went down, and that night they gave me an assignment. I mean, I walked in and they said, okay, great. Here's an assignment. Go out and do it. I'd never written anything. I'd never done any journalism of any kind. All I knew about journalism was all the president's men. That was it. Yeah. And so I did what they did. I showed up with a notebook and asked a lot of tough questions about a parking meter meeting. That's what the story was about. And I wrote my first story for a free newspaper, and it came out the next week, and I read it and saw my name there and got that little funny tingle that you get, when you see something you've created in print. And I guess I got hooked, and I slowly, kind of separated from music and put all my effort into journalism, and that's where my creativity went.
I put a lot of my, take on old newspapers, I would take sports headlines and tape them up on my bedroom wall when I was, 11, 12 years old, big headlines in nationally or locally. Harmon Killebrew hit a game-winning home run. I'd put it up on my wall, whatever it might be. So did you always have the sports bug in you while you were going through all this as well? You did not?
No, not at all. I know that might surprise people considering how much of my life has been about sports, but I was no more than an average sports young man. I grew up in Philadelphia area. I liked the Phillies, and the closest I really came, I worked. And when I was 11 years old, my first job was selling programs at Veterans Stadium in Philadelphia for the Phillies games. And I walked up and down the stands for 3 years. I did that job and I was so small as a kid, and I hit puberty late. And so I just had a little high squeaky voice yelling, scorecards, lineups, programs, scorecards, lineups. And, made 5 cents per program that we sold. And I met everybody on the Phillies because we would hang out on the field, before customers came in, and in those days, baseball players didn't separate themselves from it. Even Steve Carlton talked to us. Steve Carlton never talked to anybody.
No, he played 1 year. He was here, I think, in '87. He was actually with the Twins and never said 3 words at the end of his career.
No, years later, I was a sports writer when he was still playing, and he never said anything to me. But when I was a little kid, 11 and 12 and 13, we used to chat all the time. And so it just goes to show you. But no, I had no particular interest in sports. The only reason I ended up in sports is when after that newspaper that I told you about, I ended up going back to Columbia. I worked at that newspaper for a year and did everything. I mean, I worked 60, 70 hours a week there. I wrote stories. I took photos. I laid out the ads. I really learned from the ground up how you put out a newspaper. And that got me into Columbia, where I got a master's in journalism. And while I was at Columbia, I needed money to help pay for my tuition. And they had an internship at Sport Magazine up on the
I remember Sport Magazine.
And so I just answered it.
Yeah.
Dick Schaap's old place.
Yeah.
And I went down there and I started writing little stories for Sport Magazine. And so most of my clips were for Sport Magazine, and I did a few freelance things for them and for other magazines. And so when I graduated, time came, I wanted to be a feature writer. I wanted to write Sunday magazine, big, long pieces. And there was a job that opened up you remember Editor and Publisher, which is the old publication that's how you used to find jobs.
Right.
Yeah. It's called Editor and Publisher. And it was how people found jobs back in those days, because they would have listings and you would answer them. But one thing that they did, they never told you what the newspaper was, because they didn't want you writing directly to the newspaper. So they would say Southeastern Daily looking for, reporter, or Northwestern Weekly looking for a reporter. So there was a Southeastern Daily looking for a Sunday magazine writer. I thought, this is it. This is perfect. This is what I want. I send off all my clips. Well, of course, all my clips were sports. So I wait and I wait and I wait. And a couple months later, I'm in Finland covering the World Track and Field Championships for Track and Field News. It's something that I paid my way over, and one of those things like maybe I'll make enough money back to pay for
cover
the
my
ticket
expenses.
That I did. Yeah, exactly. That's how we used to do things back then, And so I'm there, and my phone rings in my room. I pick it up. I got that scratchy international, and I hear a voice say, "Is this Mitch Albom?" I say, "Yeah." "This is Fred Turner. I'm the sports editor with the Fort Lauderdale News and Sun Sentinel." I said, "Okay." He says, "You know that Sunday magazine job you applied for a couple months ago?" I said, "Yeah." "You didn't get it." I said, "You called me all the way over here
tell me that?
to tell me that I didn't get a job?" He said, "Well, the guy who was interviewing for that, he read your stuff. He saw it was a lot of sports clips. So he brought them over to my desk, and I've been reading them, and they're pretty good. So if you want a job in sports, I got a job for you." So I flew back from Finland, and I went down to Fort Lauderdale, and I took a job in sports. And that's how my sports writing career began. And had he not called, I probably never would have been a sports writer.
Everybody has a story. That is a good one. Hey, Rosie here for Stretch Labs. I've been talking about them for months now, and it's part of my regular exercise routine. They're located throughout the Twin Cities, and no matter who you sign up for, they have great stretch practitioners that will work with you. They are great at stretching out your hips, your back, your neck, whatever might be aching you, but more importantly, being proactive about your overall health. They understand how your body works and what you need, no matter what your age, really no matter what the shape you're in, but understand how important stretching is. Black Friday right now will offer the best pricing on bundle packages of stretches. Get anywhere from 3 to 20 sessions at a discounted rate. Hey, it also makes a great gift. And for Talk North listeners, they will have access to Black Friday pricing for all of November. So check them out for yourself. Stretch Labs throughout the Twin City area. Hey, Rosie here for Lexus of Wayzata and Lexus of Maplewood. If you're in the market for a new luxury vehicle, look no further than my good friend Charlie Swanson at Lexus. Whether you're on the west or the east side of the Twin Cities, they have got you covered with two great locations, Lexus of Wayzata and Lexus of Maplewood. Check out the all-new Lexus TX, a spacious SUV with 3 rows of seating and plenty of room for all your gear. Head over to lexusofwayzata.com or lexusofmaplewood.com for details and to find your next ride today. I know you covered all sorts of sports in Detroit in particular. Did you have a favorite athlete as your career progressed that you covered, that you dealt with, that stood out to you, not just in terms of his athletic ability, but his bedside manner, the way he treated
I mean, I had a number of them. You know, the advantage I had, I think, was that I got to be a columnist at a very young age. And so I was the same age as a lot of the guys that I was covering for a chunk of my career. You know, I became a columnist at 25.
Yeah, I can relate to that.
And in those days, you know, a lot of athletes they had to stay in college until they were 22. So, you know, they came out into the pros. They were still in their first couple of years. And of course, it wasn't the days where they had their own websites or their own Instagram accounts and all that. So they didn't need reporters. They needed reporters to tell the story. And so I became, you know, chummy with some of them because I could relate. And over the years, I think, like on the early Pistons teams, Joe Dumars was certainly a favorite of mine. He was a great guy. And he was the only guy I remember one time he had a magazine, like Sports Illustrated magazine. He was reading by his locker, and I walked past him, and he had a book hidden inside of it. And I saw him, and I said, "What's going on?" He said, "Well, it's not cool to read books in here, so I just put them inside Sports Illustrated, so that everybody thinks I'm reading Sports Illustrated." And he was a kindred spirit, and we became friends, and we still are. You know, all these decades later. And we would meet for breakfasts and talk about things and that had nothing to do with sports. And he was a great guy. Steve Yzerman and Brendan Shanahan on the Detroit Red Wings were great guys and easy to talk to. And Shanahan was funny. And we used to play a movie trivia game, you know, to pass the time in between on bus rides or planes or things like that. Barry Sanders was an interesting guy.
Oh, boy.
Over the years, very, very humble. I'll tell you a funny Barry Sanders story. There was Barry's favorite line or most quoted line was, That was it. That was it. HMMM. You know, that's basically was his big response to everything. And one game at the Silverdome, I think he rushed for like 210 or 20 yards or something like that. It broke some kind of record. And we came into the locker room, and everybody was crowded around his locker. And I could see that his locker was empty. You sort of know if the athletes have left or not because his shoes were gone. And I didn't see any clothes. I'm thinking, wow, did he leave? So in those days, the Silverdome had had a door that you could just go out and it just took you up the hill. So I went out the door and I just look up the hill. Sure enough, I see Barry walking up the hill going to his car. So I run up the hill, chase after, go, Barry, Barry, Barry. He turns around and goes, oh, hey, Mitch. And I said, Barry, there's a whole ton of people at your locker waiting to talk to you. He goes, really? And I said, yeah. Why? I said, because you ran for like 220 yards or something like that. It's a record. He goes, And I said, well, can I talk to you? He goes, yeah. So I just talked to him in the parking lot, and we just did our whole interview in the parking lot. And then he went off to his car and left. That was a quintessential Barry. You had to do that kind of stuff with him all the time. There was no ego with him. There was no sense of, he was almost the opposite.
He'd always hand the football to the referee after he scored a touchdown. Like,
correct.
I've been here. I've done this before. This is no big deal. I don't have to spike it.
Exactly.
I don't have to,
Exactly.
Always.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which I admired.
Right.
And he was fun to cover. And then there were characters like John Sally on the Pistons.
Oh my. Yeah.
Was just a wild, and Dennis Rodman and I spent a lot of time with those guys because they were very good during those days. And Sally was nuts. I mean, he was just funny, and he got caught eating popcorn once on his bench. He didn't think he was going to go in, and he grabbed a thing of popcorn from one of the waiters or waitresses that were walking past that would serve the rich customers. And he took it, he hid it under his chair and whatever. And
those guys were crazy back then.
Stuff like that.
Yeah. Listen, we want to turn the page a little bit. I know we have some time constraints, but to get more of a serious side of what Mitch Albom has been doing his whole adult life as well. And what I was so emotional about watching you that night at, again, the Central Library in Minneapolis. And you've been so involved after the Haiti earthquake in 2010, I believe, catastrophic. I don't know how many deaths, 150, 200, who knows? We will maybe never know. But you got so involved with the cause. And a lot of people donate money. They do what they can. And there's nothing wrong with any of that. But you made visits there and eventually got involved in an orphanage to the point where you not only took over the orphanage, but you adopted a couple of children from there. I'm stunned of what motivated you to take that quantum leap to not only get involved but become part of your life and your family's life.
Well, it really started, Mark, after Tuesdays with Morrie. Like I told you, I think up to that point I was pretty self-centered, and I don't know, maybe I wasn't a total ass, but I certainly focused on myself, and I wasn't really very involved in charities or things like that. I was just very ambitious. And then I spent all that time with Morrie, and I saw that a lot of the things that were really important in my life weren't the slightest bit important to him, and gave him no comfort. At the end of his life and his dying days, he never mentioned money. Money didn't matter to him, and it didn't give him any comfort. All that gave him comfort were the people that he had touched, and I saw how many of them came back, and I realized, that's in the end how you're going to be evaluated, and that's what's going to matter in your final days. And I was lucky that sort of at the midpoint of my life, I was able to sort of see that. And Morrie admonished me, saying, what do you do for charities in your community? And I said, I write checks. He said, well, anybody can write a check, but you have a voice. You have a column. You're on newspaper, radio, TV. You need to use your voice for more than just aggrandizing yourself. And so I started my first charity that year with him. One led to another here in Detroit. And then I started something called Say Detroit during the Super Bowl in 2006. And I really did find that helping people, and particularly the homeless and children, was not only important, but it made you feel like you had a purpose in life. It let you sleep better at night. And I took all the kind of energy that I always threw into writing my first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth column of the day, rewriting, and put it into trying to help other people. And I saw that I had some aptitude for it. I have a pretty good organized mind, about how, okay, well, this and do this, and we can do this, and we can do that. And I'd met a lot of people over the years who could help raise money, because I've been fortunate to have movies made of my books, and I've met people in that world, and some people who have some influence. And so I started tapping into them and saying, well, yeah, can you help us with this? Can you help us with that? And then I went to Haiti. I didn't even know where Haiti was on the map, but I saw the earthquake was terrible, and it killed about 300,000 people, about 3% of Haiti's population. If you can imagine, if we had an earthquake like that in America that killed 3% of our population, there'd be 9 million people dead. And so you can imagine how it affected the country, and a million people were left homeless. And when I went down there, I was so shaken up by what I saw, and yet so moved by the kids who just still had faith and joy, and even though they didn't have a pot to piss in, I mean, they all their possessions could fit in a tiny shoebox, pair of shoes maybe, and a shirt and pants and somebody else's underwear. And so I came back and I started writing about that, and I started taking guys down from Detroit, and we started rebuilding this orphanage. We built the first toilets that they ever had. Until then, they were just using holes in the ground. And we built showers and a kitchen, and eventually we built this big school. And in time, I just sort of inherited it. And the guy who was running it didn't have any money, and he was in his 80s, and he just sort of left. And next thing I know, I was running it, and I was going there every month, and I've been going there every month ever since. It's 16 years this January. And
Amazing.
Over the years, we've brought through well over 100 kids, and we've had 22 graduate from our school, which it's a beautiful school, runs 4 hours in French and 4 hours in English every day. And all 22 of them have earned college degrees or college scholarships. They're here in the U.S. now, and 2 of them are in medical school.
Incredible.
And so we're really proud of them. And unfortunately, with the travel ban that President Trump has put in, they can't go home, because if they go home, they can't come back. And so now they basically live with us. And we're talking now a few days before Thanksgiving. I mean, we're prepping for 22 Haitians to join us for the whole Thanksgiving weekend, along with our whole other huge family, because this is what it is. They live here during the summer. They live here over Christmas breaks. And so we went from not having kids of our own to having very, very large family. And we adopted a couple of them ourselves for particular circumstances that happened, a couple little girls. And so it's been joyous. I mean, if it sounds at all like a burden, I don't mean it to, because I look at it as quite the opposite. It's a privilege to be able to help these kids, and it's a joy to have them in my life, and they provide everything that my wife and I need to feel like we're living a good life. Comes from them, and seeing their progress, and seeing how they've gone from, in some cases, being abandoned under a tree and left to die when they were infants, to going to college. And you just see what's possible when you give people a chance, or a second chance.
Well, as a father who adopted a little girl from Korea, I can relate on a different level, but you give someone that second chance. And I watch her. I had dinner with her the other night, a grown woman, and her interest, her intelligence, and everything that would not have been possible in the environment she was going to grow up with, especially in Korea as a young single woman. It gives you pause for sure. And that kind of segues into your latest novel, Twice, which I've read twice, as I mentioned, which is about a man, Alfie, getting second chances in life and love, basically. And I think it says it best. You get to do things twice. When you read this book, you really have to concentrate. It's astonishing because you put yourself in that position. What prompted you how did this come to you as a book? And I found it emotional. I found it funny. It's got it all. And like I said, I've already kind of read it twice because it had that kind of meaning to me.
Well, I think appreciate that. First of all, thank you, Mark. And I think probably the very fact that what you're saying is kind of why I did it. As you reach certain ages in life, you find that a lot of the people around you are talking about regrets and things that they should have done. And when you're younger, you don't like your job, you switch it. You don't like your partner, you break up. You move. But as we get older, the concrete settles, and we get kind of, I can't, it's too late. I missed my chance. I can't. and that leads to regret. And so I said, well, let me create a story where someone actually has the power to undo all that and see if this grass is actually greener when you get a second chance. And so that was the motivation for creating the story, because I knew it was something that a lot of people think about.
Yeah, it's really it hits you right between the eyes, as they say in many cases. And there's a criminal element to it. There's a lot of twists and turns, and it's always an easy read and a fascinating read. And I left a few teardrops on the pages, as well, as I think I told you.
Uh-huh.
Listen, before I get you out of here,
that's not bad.
Well, it's not at all. No, it's not at all. Getting one more sports topic, because he is the talk of the Twin Cities, and not for all the right reasons right now. But you covered J.J. McCarthy for his days at Michigan. What kind of insights can you give to this young man, and what kind of hope can you sell here to Viking fans to say, take a deep breath? He's only 6-7 games into this thing. I know what he's capable of. Or do you have a different thought process about where young JJ's at right now?
No, well, first of all, he's an exceptional person. Mm-hmm. And I think that he will, it may take him until the off season, because we all know once you're in the middle of an NFL season, it's very hard to adjust to things or learn new things. The schedule just doesn't allow it. You have your Mondays, you're reviewing your tape. Tuesdays, you're off. Wednesdays, you start concentrating on the next opponent. Thursdays, you go all out. Friday, you do a walkthrough. Saturday, you're on a plane. When are you going to really focus on what it is that you need to fix, if there's something that you need to fix? But he will. That's who he is. Whatever it is that he's lacking or he's not doing right, he will spend the entire offseason fixing. And he's extremely smart, and has a feel for the game. And so I've watched his games. I watched them when they played against the Lions, which they had success. He looked like a world beater when they beat the Lions. And we were thinking, I remember writing after that game, oh no, if Minnesota is in this thing too, look at the NFC North. It's a nut house. I mean, everybody's gonna. It's like lobsters in a pail. Everybody trying to crawl to the top, and being so close to each other. Now I see Minnesota's kind of out of it at this point, given how far ahead the other guys are. But I do think that he will learn, and I would not give up on J.J. McCarthy. He's not your average kid, and he's probably right now, if I know him, he's struggling mentally with failure because he hasn't known it, and it's new to him. But he'll figure it out the way that he has figured other things out, and then he'll get a handle on it. He has a lot of talent, and he has a lot of smarts and football smarts. So yeah, I would. But as hard as it is, and believe me, it's not. We in Detroit know what it's like to have quarterbacks that don't live up to their billing. We drafted Andre Ware and Chuck Long, and Rodney Peete,
Joey Harrington,
Scott Mitchell, Charlie Batch. I mean, I can just rattle them off, and so we know. But he's worth the time. He's worth some patience.
And it's hard to have patience when you play every Sunday and you're exposed to statistics and your game tape, and you can't necessarily fix that in the off season. You can get better somehow, some way. Of course, he missed a whole year last year with his injury. Couldn't even practice last year, but you know how it is. It's what have you done for me lately? And there's people already getting anxiousness about his future here in Minnesota. So, well, I appreciate your perspective on all of that. Yeah. Well, listen, Mitch, I really appreciate your time. I know you're a busy man, and thanks for your friendship. Thanks for all your contributions, and I'm so happy we were able to reconnect again at the book signing at the library and get the book twice. It is worth your while. Thanks, Mitch, so much for spending some time with us today.
It's a pleasure, Mark. Let's not make it so long between visits.
I'll take those words as you did with Morrie, 100%. Thank you so much, Mitch.
You're welcome.